What's up guys, today we're going to be finally going over the Geomag Arc Warlock build. It's taken me a while to get to this build for a few reasons. One, I committed to just uploading 5 videos a week, which means it's going to take me a little bit longer to get to the videos I want to make, but the goal being this episode to actually make it to Act 2 and 3 and kind of be more consistent with my uploads. And the second reason is, by the title you can kind of see, at first I wasn't a huge fan of this build, but it's kind of been growing on me over time as I play more and more things with it. So jumping into the build, looking at Geomag, damaging targets with Chaos Reach extends its duration, collecting Ionic traces grants you energy for Chaos Reach, sprinting while near max bolt charges will grant stacks over time. So looking at those 3 different aspects of this exotic, first we have the fact that doing damage with Chaos Reach will extend its duration, and this has always been really strong. And on this Lost Sector boss, I can kill him in 1 super, and this dude has a lot of health. I've actually seen this build used in second encounter in the dungeon to solo 1 phase. I think it was by Bog. If I remember after editing this video and find the tweet, I'll link it down below. It's pretty crazy. Then the second part is collecting Ionic traces will grant you energy for Chaos Reach, and this got increased from 2% to now 7%. And with this build, you'll be creating a bajillion Ionic traces and be getting your super incredibly fast, sometimes like 5 to 10 seconds. It is actually absurd how fast you can get your super with this build. And the final part is, while sprinting with 6 or more bolt charges, it will top off your stacks of bolt charge as you sprint, which is pretty handy, and bolt charges are insanely good. And with Spark of Frequency, that does double the stacks of bolt charge you get from sprinting, so it goes from 6, 8 to 10 instead of 1 at a time. Then look at the second part of this build is going to be Delicate Tomb. And this got updated just like Geomag this season. And the main changes are increase the chance to make a Ionic trace from minor combatants up from 4 to 10% now. Increase the PV damage from the bonus perk Tempest Cascade from 30% up to 100%, so double damage. And remove the timer from the perk so it'll just last until you fire it. And the main thing that makes this work incredibly well in this build, outside of it just doing great damage and AoE ad clear, is the fact that final blows have a chance to generate the Ionic traces. Then when you collect those traces, your next shot will jolt and do double damage. And we look at the damage of this thing now. It's important to hipfire with this weapon. Hipfiring will do more damage, roughly 20% more, and every shot will do 16 bolts of damage, hitting almost 7,000 per bolt on Carl with the perk, then down to 3.4 thousand without it, and every shot will jolt and reproc that jolt damage, which is roughly 5,000. And if you do ADS with it, the damage will go down a little bit, but you can still ADS if things are far away because it will tighten the burst. Looking at the damage numbers of this weapon with and without particle, with and without the buff, these are all numbers. With the buff hitting 115,000, 145,000 with particle, which is actually insane from a single shot of a special weapon. And the DPS of this weapon with just the first shot under the buff, 5 without, is almost 73,000, then 91,000 with particle, which is once again pretty good for a special. But the main thing about this weapon is just using it with its perk for ad clear, or even single target damage, going up to a champion, hitting them with the first shot under buff. It's probably going to get pretty close to killing them. That is how much damage this thing is doing. And not only is this weapon great for this build because it does a lot of damage and has great ad clear with the jolts, every single final blow has a chance to create these traces, and the traces give us more super energy to play into the Geomags. And the final new part of this build is going to be the Ionic Sentry, the new arc aspect for Warlock, where defeating targets with kinetic or arc weapons or arc abilities to charge up an arc turret that periodically chains lightning between nearby targets, granting a stackable charge with each hit, and when you deploy it, it will blind targets nearby. So at first, I wasn't a huge fan of this aspect. I have always been a big fan of Bleak Watcher for the Stasis turret, and this is going to be a very similar effect where you throw down a stationary turret, and this one will zap things and blind them on impact when you actually throw it. And the reason I wasn't a huge fan of this at first is because for ad clear, it's not the greatest thing ever. It does zap pretty far away, but the rate of it zapping is pretty slow. If anything, this is more utility than ad clear. It's great for the blinding effect, which can also stop Unstoppable. And it just will add more ad clear and damage over time, but not like an absurd amount. But as I've used it more and more and kind of thought about it, I've realized, well, this isn't replacing your grenade. This isn't replacing your melee. This is just another ability on top of your existing kit. And framing it like that, I think it's a lot better. If this was replacing your grenade, I'd be like, it's good, but not great. But with it just being an additional thing to use on top of everything else on Arc Warlock, it is pretty good. And the fact that it gives you stacks of bullet charge on every hit, bullet charges are great, so that definitely doesn't hurt. But my main use of this has honestly been for the blinding, and that helps build into the rest of our subclass, first with Electrostatic Mind, where defeating targets with arc abilities or defeating jolted or blinded targets creates an Ionic Trace. Collecting an Ionic Trace makes you amplified. And to go along with that, we have Spark of Beacons. While we are amplified, which we'll have all the time from collecting the traces, your arc special or heavy ammo weapon final blows create a blinding explosion. So also we have the Delicate Tomb, which will now jolt and blind every single thing we hit. And then I like to run the new arc LMG, or if I need damage, a arc linear fusion rifle. But whenever we get final blow, everything else will become blinded. And with the Delicate Tomb, they'll also be jolted. So 2 ways to make sure we get the traces on every single final blow with our weapons. Then we also have Spark of Discharge, where arc weapon final blows have a chance to create an Ionic Trace. And collecting those traces will grant us a stack of bolt charge. Also, we have Ions, where defeating a jolted target or defeating them with a bolt charge will create another trace. So between that, our Aspect, Discharge, and Delicate Tomb, you're guaranteed 2 per final blow, sometimes 3 or even 4. And every single trace will give us that 7% of super energy. And as you can see, before you know it, you just have your super instantly. And every shot with a fusion will constantly be under the buff, doing the double damage. In my final fragment, I like to run Frequency. So while we're amplified, we'll get 2 stacks of bolt charge from every source instead of 1. You could also run Spark of Shock to make your Arc Grenade Jolt another source of jolt to feed into our Aspect to create more traces. But I like Frequency myself to get bolt charge faster, and that is because with the artifact, bolt charges will also jolt and heal you. So another way to create traces, but more importantly, the healing part. Arc Warlock has really no way to heal you built into the subclass outside of your healing rift. So making sure to heal from the bolt charges and getting more and more bolt charges ready is very important. And I like to run the new healing AR in the top slot for another source of healing on this build, which is kind of like the only thing it's lacking is a true consistent way to heal. This season, the bolt charges help a lot with the artifact, but in future seasons, you're going to be really limited to your healing rift, which you do get really quickly from the traces. Traces give you a chunk of all ability energy. So it's important to make sure to place down that rift and maybe run a healing AR also to give you more sources of healing. And the final 2 things is just looking at our mods and our artifact. It's pretty straightforward stuff. I like to run Recovery, Resilience, Discipline, Intellect, Strength. It kind of doesn't really matter what stat you have. I think Recovery is actually important on this build, but I don't have that many sets of armor that does have Recovery. But I am running Font of Wisdom. That is the one thing I'll shout out. That'll give me more Intellect when I have sets of armor charge. But after that, everything else is pretty straightforward. It doesn't really matter. You're not really using your abilities that much in this build. You're mainly using the Ionic Sentry and the Delicate Tomb and your super. So you can kind of use whatever you want. I do think it's worth running a Elemental Charge to gain stacks of armor charge from collecting the traces. But outside of that, kind of use whatever you want. I also threw on a special finisher because we'll be using the Delicate Tomb a lot in this build, just to help make sure we have ammo at all times. And there's also the mod from the artifact that does the same thing, where you get ammo from finishing powerful combatants. Outside that, all the typical stuff on the artifact. One thing to note is that Unstoppable Fusion doesn't seem to work with the Delicate Tomb. I'm not sure if that's intended or not. Obviously with Jolt, the Delicate Tomb will stun Overload. And then the blinding from the Fragment or throwing down our Ionic Sentry will stun Unstoppables. So you only really need a way to stun Barrier, which I usually just run a Sidearm in my top slot. And yeah, that is pretty much the full build. Like usual, I'll link it down below in the description. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, at first I wasn't a huge fan of this build, and that's because this build, while it will get the job done in really any piece of content, it really excels in certain types of content. And that's going to be things with a steady flow of high health targets mixed with accurate sections. So the best example of this will be Nightfalls, particularly Master or GMs, where you're going to have these high health champions or high health mini bosses, but then also have decent accurate sections between those. So like champion kill a group of ads, champion kill a group of ads. and back and forth, and that is where a build like this really shines. So I'm really looking forward to using this build in GMs next week. And so far I've been doing lost sectors on both difficulties, 20 and 30 under, and it's been great in there too. One thing is you kind of have to watch your health with this build, which is one of the things I was putting out. But in a fire team situation, I don't think that will be a problem. Our content where this will be really good is dungeon and raid encounters, pre-boss fights, so like the opening encounters of dungeons and raids, or like puzzle encounters. So for example, the first encounter of the new dungeon, this will obviously be great. With the subjugators, then the ad clear between rooms, you can easily get your super back for every single room, use it on the subjugator, and move on. And why at first I didn't really like this build is because I really wasn't playing that type of content much the first week of the game. I was mostly playing the seasonal activity, and content like that, a build like this is kind of overkill. Do I really need my Chaos Reach every 10 seconds versus like a group of red bars? No, I'd rather just use a better ability spam build with built-in healing like Prismatic. But that's one of the things that makes this game great, is that not every build, not every playstyle has to be great in everything or great for every person. There's so many good exotics builds in this game that you can really fine-tune and use the one that is the best for whatever you're doing or the way you want to play the game. So even though I don't love this in every aspect of the game, don't let that stop you. And if you love this, definitely rock it. Anyways, I think that's gonna be it for the video. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.